Hello, I'm Annie Graham Larkin, Executive Director of the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum. Welcome to The History of Lowell, Arizona with Mike Anderson. Thank you to our program sponsor, the Arizona Historical Society, as well as our members and donors who enable the museum to provide free online programming and fulfill the organization's mission to discover history, explore Bisbee's past today. To learn how you can assist the museum in supporting its mission and programs by becoming a member or donor, please visit bisbeemuseum.org. From Friday, December 13th through Monday, December 23rd, the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum is offering free admission to Bisbee and Naco residents. Simply flash your ID to take advantage of this offer. And today and every Saturday at 2 p.m., the Bisbee Mining and Historical Museum offers the Stepping Back in Time walking tour with former museum curator Boyd Nickel. During this 1-hour walking tour of the historic district, you will learn about the rich history of the mining camp. Spaces are limited and reservations are highly recommended. To reserve your space, please visit bisbeemuseum.org. All right. Longtime Bisbee resident Mike Anderson is the author of Warren Ballpark, a work that delves into the rich history of the playing field. He is also the historian and founding member of the Friends of the Warren Ballpark in Bisbee. In addition to Warren Ballpark, Anderson's historical research has been featured in numerous journals and articles. And if you'd like to ask questions during the program today, please type your questions in the Q&A chat box. We'll gather those questions to share with Mike after the presentation. Also, a link to the recording of today's program will be sent to all of our Zoom registrants later today. And with that, I'd like to welcome Mike Anderson. Thanks for joining us once again, Mike.
And thanks for having me once again, Annie. And hello to everybody that's watching this Zoom presentation today. I'd like to start off just by asking folks out there, and I know you can't respond immediately to me, but when you're driving by the pit, those of you who live here, or those of you who visited here, we live in a most unusual place. And there are very few cities in the United States that have a giant hole in their middle. The one place I can think of that's shares the same kind of characteristic as Butte, Montana, and exactly for the same reason. It's a copper mining town that sometime in the past decades, copper was discovered underneath some of its neighborhoods, and those neighborhoods were destroyed. And we drive by what used to be Lowell all the time. And we just take it for granted that the whole is the pit, Lavender Pit and Sacramento Pit have been there forever, but they haven't. So before 1951, there was a thriving community located right in the middle of what would be today Bisbee's belly button, and that would be Lowell. So we're going to take a look at it today. What used to be, what is now, and what may be in the future. And just looking at this postcard that shows Lowell as it existed probably around 1918, it was a pretty nice commercial neighborhood. This is what we call Erie Street today, was known as Main Street until 1959 when Lowell was incorporated into Bisbee. So here's what I'd like for you to learn today. Hopefully, this is what will come to pass. Why did Lowell come into existence? What was its significance in the development of the entire Warren Mining District? How did it evolve as a community? What were its demographic characteristics? What led to the destruction of most of it? And why is it enjoying a resurgence of interest in the 21st century? What is Lowell's future? Something that a lot of us are interested in right now. So Lowell got its name from a New England city, Lowell, Massachusetts, which was one of the earliest textile mill cities in America, one of the communities that kickstarted the Industrial Revolution in the United States. And Lowell was famous for textile mills, and you can see a couple of them right there. Today, it's a national monument, or National Historic Park, I should say, and the textile mills are part of that park. In the 1870s, after The Chiricahua Apaches were removed from southeast Arizona, and prospectors rushed in, and minerals were found in Tombstone and Bisbee. Folks back east started casting their eyes on this part of the country, looking at it for potential investments. And in Lowell, Massachusetts, which was flush with money at that time, it had a population of about 80,000. I think today it's about 105,000. Folks were looking for ways to invest their money into um, enterprises in the American West, which is where a lot of folks were looking to invest their money. So in the late 1890s, a company was started, 1899 exactly, to develop a mine in Lowell. At that time in Bisbee, most of the mining activity was centered within less than a mile from the east of downtown Bisbee. So the Czar, the Neptune, the Holbrook, the Copper Queen, all the mines that were the mines that were developed in the earlier days of Bisbee from the 1880s until the last years of the 20th century were located close to Bisbee, old Bisbee. And then with the creation of the Lowell and Arizona Mining Company, we see mining activity start to move to the east. And this was the mining company that came in. There's the first newspaper article I could find about the mine, the original mine in Lowell, the Lowell in Arizona. And this was the Lowell Shaft, located on the slopes of the Mule Mountains overlooking the town of Lowell. Now, as soon as development started on this mine, it was too far away from Old Bisbee for miners to walk to work. So a new community had to develop right around the location of the Lowell mine. And because it was developed by the Lowell in Arizona, which was created by investors in Lowell, Massachusetts, it got the name of Lowell, Arizona. And it never was an incorporated community, and that's important to consider in this. Lowell never became the city of Lowell, the village of Lowell, the town of Lowell. It was just Lowell, a community, part of the Warren Mining District, but it was a separate community into and of itself, separate from Bisbee, separate from Warren, separate from everything else. It had its own personality. It had its own community assets. And after the Lowell in Arizona was created, another company started coming in, and this was the Calumet in Arizona, which was financed by money from the copper country of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, Duluth, Minnesota, and some money also from iron and steel interests in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The first mine developed by them was the Irish Mag, which was named for a Brewery Gulch prostitute. And as soon as that mine came into development, people started being attracted to that area. And again, it's a little bit further to the east than the mining that had gone on in Bisbee before that in the Warren Mining District. So now we have two companies that are conducting operations to the east of where mining was going on in Bisbee prior to that. And within a very short period of time, an embryonic community starts developing in the flatter area around just below the Lowell Shaft and the newly developed Irish Mag. And in a short time after the Irish Mag started operations, the Junction Mine, the Hodson Mine, the Powell Mine, Oliver Mine, and a lot of other mines started coming into the same area. And this was the community of Lowell that started. And by 1901, there was a number of commercial establishments that were taking care of the needs of the miners and the other folks that had moved into the area, the miners and those that were going to mine the pockets of the miners. And also, we start seeing neighborhoods starting to develop right around the main street of Lowell. And what we call Erie Street now was called Main Street in Lowell up until 1959. So when I refer to Main Street, I'm not going to be talking about Main Street in Old Bisbee. I'm talking about Main Street in Lowell. And this is one of the earliest photographs. So this is probably about 1905 or so, judging before 1908 because there's no automobiles. It's all wood frame buildings. and we're just starting to see brick construction coming in. And then a third mining company comes in, and that was the Den, um, Arizona mine. Maurice Den was the person that was in charge of that, and that was financed by money primarily that came from Superior, Wisconsin, which was right across the St. Louis River from Duluth, Minnesota, which was financing the Calumet, Arizona mining company. So money from the Great Lakes region is financing a lot of the mines around what is now Lowell, and then in Lowell, Arizona or Lowell, Massachusetts is also financing it. Now, Phelps Dodge is looking at this and realizing that they got beat to the punch by these mining companies, that some of the most promising um, mining claims, potential mines, are in the hands of other people. So by 1902, they bought out the Lowell, Arizona mine, and it was just the Lowell mine owned by Phelps Dodge. So there are three companies now operating around Lowell: the Den, Arizona, the Calumet, Arizona, and Phelps Dodge. And the population of Lowell is expanding at a pretty rapid rate. So the map on the left shows all of the little neighborhoods that made up what we consider to be Lowell. And the original Lowell was right around here, just to the west of the or south, northwest of the traffic circle. And as mines developed, other communities developed as well. So that before the pit, and the pit didn't exist when Lowell was there. This is all hills, a little bit of flat ground around here, and of course the slopes of the Mule Mountains, and right here, Sacramento Hill. Within a short period of time, Lowell was developed. By 1903, we start seeing references to Upper Lowell in order to meet the needs of an expanding population, also to provide housing for nearby mines. And then 1907, Jiggerville. 1905, the Johnson Addition. One street neighborhood of Germantown and Maxwell Hill, Bower Hill. And all of these areas here, the Mason Addition, all of these areas here developed by 1907 into what we now call Lowell. So this whole area here would have been known as Lowell. And small neighborhoods connected by roads, and you'll see those in just a few minutes. Here's a Sanborn fire map, and this shows the original settlement of Lowell. This is number 17 is the Johnson Addition. Number 19 right here is Upper Lowell and the Junction Mine. In order to get to Upper Lowell, you had to travel actually through CNA property to get there. This doesn't show where Jiggerville developed in 1907, but it's right around in here. So mines and the communities that are developing around them. And downtown Lowell became, by year 1910, was pretty well established. It had some very nice buildings comparable to the construction that existed in Old Bisbee after the fire of 1908. And we start seeing late Edwardian construction, beautiful brick buildings coming in. The same thing in Lowell. So on the left, you can see this is the Marks Hotel originally. And this was a hotel up here, and then commercial shops. And this was a standard building plan, of course, Lowell Drug. And later on, the Busy Bee Cafe would be on this end of the building. This is the Bonanza Circle Hotel right here. And again, you can see the sign for rooms. And on this side of the street, this was the Phelps Dodge Mercantile, which later became the Patsy Brad Arizona Baking Company building. And you can see before the construction of dump number 7 in the 1950s, there's Gold Hill, Black Knob, as it's sometimes known as, in the background, and there's nothing obstructing it. If you look at the same view today, you see dump number 7, you'll just see a little bit of hilltop peeping out there. Now, these photos, again, are early on because there's no automobiles in them. So these are probably pre-1908 photographs. This is a really good view from the north side of Lowell, looking down, and you can see how extensive it is. So this would have been taken after 1910. This is the Mason Hotel, a three-story building that is right across the street from where the Bisbee Breakfast Club is today. And you can see sidewalks and foundations. Mason Street is where people park their cars. This is the Arizona Baking Company Phelps Dodge building, which was torn down in 1994. The Junction Mine right here. Over here is Upper Lowell and then Jiggerville. And then over here, Cowan Ridge. And then the older Phelps Dodge mines are located over in this area right here. So Lowell covered an extensive area, and its population was numbered in the thousands by the first 5 years. So there were several thousand people living here. At maximum population, the all the different communities that made up Lowell. So Lowell itself, Upper Lowell, Jiggerville, Johnson Addition, which is over here, Germantown, Maxwell Hill, Bower Hill. All of these by maximum population, about 1917, was between 6,000 and 7,000 people living in. This is one of the very best views of Lowell as far as panoramas, covers about 2/3 of it. There is the power plant for the Bisbee Improvement Company. There's the Mason Hotel. Main Street, Erie Street today is right here. There's the Phelps Dodge Arizona Baking Company building. This is about where Bisbee Breakfast Club is today. And between the Mason Hotel and the Arizona Baking Company, Phelps Dodge Mercantile, you can see Mason Street. And Mason Street was the entry point going right past the power plant and into the Junction Mine property, the road to Upper Lowell, which is right there. And beyond it is Jiggerville up in the clouds. And you can also see some other prominent landmarks here. This was the Bisbee Women's Club in the middle. So, or the Lowell Women's Club, excuse me. And Lowell had an active social structure. So it had women's organizations, it had fraternal organizations, it had some churches. And this structure right here was the original Bisbee Farmers Market. And it was an open air structure. You can see it's just a roof on pillars or posts. And every weekend and sometimes other days of the week, people would bring their produce in just like they do today and other items to sell. So this was the original farmers market right here. The Shell station that exists today would be right around here. In fact, I think you can see that building right there. And this is Cowan Ridge. Lowell School, the original Lowell School, right over there. And this is the road there to, this is Naco Road that later became US 80. It goes to the Johnson Addition and then up to Slag Dump Hill, to Bacher Canyon, and then into Old Bisbee. This is the eastern end of downtown Lowell. And there's the road that today it's been straightened out, of course, but this is the 92, the predecessor to 92 that goes out to Don Louis. The road to Bakerville and Warren goes this way. There is no traffic circle. That's not going to exist until 1951. This is Ryan Service Station, which moved to Bakerville after the pit was expanded. And this is now a vacant lot. And across the street, this is where Dunlap's Service Center is. Used to be a standard service station. And then the old Douglas Road goes through to here. This is the location of where the Shady Dell is today. It was a motor court as early as the 1930s. And there's again is downtown Lowell. So it's quite an extensive community. And this is a really good example, a colored postcard that shows what the housing looked like. And this is very much like the housing stock on the sides of the Chihuahua Hill and School Hill and Brewery Gulch and up Tombstone Canyon. So miner shacks, boarding houses. This is all residential. There's the Lowell mine. This is all residential. And this is the plot or the plat for Upper Lowell. And the street, there were named streets, but what was interesting to note in the directory is that there were no named streets mentioned. They just had numbers for houses in Upper Lowell. So it's hilly, unpaved streets, and for a couple of decades, a lot of these houses did not have indoor plumbing, or some of them didn't have electric light. And the population of these particular houses would have been mixed ethnicities. There were a lot of Finns that lived in Upper Lowell and Jiggerville. There were two lodging houses, the Block House and the Superior House, that catered exclusively to Finns. So you wouldn't have heard any other language spoken in those houses but Finnish. It would have been Finnish oriented cuisine prepared by Finnish cooks. And a really good example of how Bisbee's neighborhoods were ethnic enclaves, just like neighborhoods in the eastern industrialized cities in the late 19th and early 20th century. And this is Upper Lowell. So this is looking from the west, and you can see Lowell was built on slopes, and you could look down your neighbor's chimney if you're up on the upper levels. And this is looking from above, from the west and looking east. That's the junction and Lowell. And this is Upper Lowell. Upper Lowell was almost all residential. There were a few small businesses up there, but it was mostly just places for people to live. And this is a kind of a close up view of this same photo right here. And you can see how close together the buildings were, how multi-story buildings. A lot of these were designed for either families or several families to live in. And there was a constant turnover. If you look at the Bisbee Daily Review, people coming and going, taking jobs elsewhere, coming into the Warren Mining District. So there would be rentals. You could rent a room, you could rent a house, you could rent a boarding house or buy a boarding house. But it was, as you can see, predominantly residential and pretty scruffy. And this is Jiggerville looking towards the north. And Jiggerville was originally designed for intermediate supervisors at the mines, the jigger bosses, and later on became a mixed neighborhood as it expanded. As I said, there were a lot of Finns living in Jiggerville before the deportation. They all left right after the deportation, whether they were driven out on trains or not, they all left together. So Jiggerville was literally at the top of the world in Lowell. You could look down and see the whole community. Much of Lowell was developed by a fellow named Joseph Edward Thompson, and he branded his company as JET. And thank you, Gary Dillard, for tipping me off about him and his story and his relationship to Bisbee and to the mining community of the American West. So this is Mr. Thompson right here. He was a real estate developer. He'd buy properties and then do what people do today, which is plat them out and develop them and sell off the properties to private persons. And what he did was buy a large block of property from John Johnson and called it the Johnson Edition. So this is Tate Hill, and this is downtown business district of the Johnson Edition. And all this now, this is where the thickener tanks are, or the structures that are in the process of being destroyed by Freeport are located right around here. And much of this hill was just blasted off. So this community disappeared in 1951. It was destroyed several times before that by fire and flood and rose from the dead. Mr. Thompson, who used the brand of JET for his real estate company, and at the time, until Gary tipped me off about this, I thought Jet is kind of an interesting name for something that didn't exist in technology at this time, but it was just his initials. He is, by the way, the brother of William Boyce Thompson Arboretum, and the person who was the principal investor and guiding force behind Magma Copper Company in Superior, and later, of course, it expanded to San Manuel. He was here for a few years, made his money, and left town. And this is the Johnson family, John Milton Thompson and his wife, who was from Florence, and their baby. And he was a merchant. He sold property to J.E. Thompson, but he got his name on the Johnson edition. This is him over here as well. So he owned a large store. He had a large building block. I'll show it to you. It was this building right here. That's the Johnson building. Here's the far end of it. And he let out parts of his building to merchants, including Bauer Meat Company. And here's another view of Johnson. This is looking down. This would be Naco Road. That's Cowan Ridge over here. And there's Black Knob. And this is a plat map of Johnson Edition. This is Tate Hill. So everything was just like Old Bisbee and just like Upper Lowell and Jiggerville. Everything was on a slope. And as I said, Lowell had a pretty well-evolved society early on. And one of the things that they did was develop sports. As soon as Warren Ballpark opened, the English immigrants in Lowell, and there were a number of them, created a soccer team called Lowell United. And so our next door neighbor, Christine Rothery's dad, Harry Rothery, right here, was a member of that team. And they existed from 1909 until about the end of the Great War. Lowell also had its own baseball team, and it was every bit as good as the Bisbee baseball team. And this ad here shows how Lowell and their team was sponsored by the CNA, because most of the folks in this photo here, including Harry, worked for the Calumet in Arizona. There's some Phelps Dodge employees, and some Den employees in Lowell, but mostly CNA at this time. And we know that Lowell played an important part in terms of the Bisbee deportation, because a lot of the folks that were deported that day came from Lowell. They were miners. The Finns were extremely militant, having lived under the thumb of the Russian Empire for a number of years. So a lot of them were members of the IWW, just militant, anti-authoritarian, anti-government, anti-boss man. So many of them were deported that day and rounded up there. We know that a number of other ethnicities were rounded up. And you can see there's the Johnson Edition, there's downtown Lowell, and there's this long line of vigilantes wearing the white handkerchief around their arms, and on flanking a double line of deportees in there. So there's about 4,000 men in this long line snaking down from Old Bisbee over here down to Lowell and then to Warren Ballpark. The only fatalities that took place the day of the Bisbee deportation happened in Upper Lowell, and that was James Brew, or excuse me, Jiggerville, I believe. James Brew, who was the miner that answered the door, and whether he shot first or whether the vigilante shot first, when the gun smoke settled, James Brew was dead, and Orson McCrae, who was the deputized mine boss for the CNA, who was in charge of a squad of men who went to Stodgel's boarding house and confronted Brew. James Brew and Orson McCrae were both dead. They were the only fatalities that day, thankfully. Just like Old Bisbee, Lowell and its satellite communities were subjected to a number of natural and man-made catastrophes over the years. There were frequent fires in the Johnson Addition. There were massive fires in Lowell, and we'll get to that in a second. Um, they were also subjected to torrential rain and floods that originated in Old Bisbee and just Mill Gulch flooded and Brewery Gulch flooded, and the two floodwaters joined and came down into Johnson Addition. And in 1910, massive flood killed two people: a candy store owner, elderly woman who refused to leave her store, and another person. So there were also some major fires, just periodic fires in the Johnson Addition. So what were the causes of those fires? Kerosene lamps, men smoking like chimneys, both cigarettes and cigars, and dry lumber. And you put all those things together and you have lots and lots of opportunities for fire. So the first major fire in Lowell that destroyed the entire south side, or almost the entire south side, I should say, of Main Street, today's Erie Street, was in 1915. And the second catastrophic fire, the one you see in this photo, took place in late October 1920, caused $750,000 worth of damage, which was pretty substantial for those days. So the buildings that exist today on the north side of Erie Street replaced these buildings. And here they are. This is what exists today. So these buildings were erected from 1921 onward. They're only one story, and that raises some interesting questions too. Why just one story instead of two stories? I'm thinking the population by 1920 had already started to drop. And I'm also thinking that strong likelihood that a lot of the rooms above here were used by prostitutes. And a good way to get rid of prostitutes is don't give them a place to stay. Anyway, this picture was taken about 1940. And this is where the Bisbee Breakfast Club is today. And just about all this is still in existence. And this is looking east on what is today Erie Street. This is looking west on what is today Erie Street, about the same period. And you can see up here the Mason Hotel, that three-story building, and some of the other buildings that are here today. This residence is gone, but a lot of these buildings are still in existence. Lowell was unincorporated, so it didn't have city ordinances. As soon as Bisbee incorporated, they started looking at what to do about prostitution in the red light district. They confined prostitution very early on up to the upper end of Brewery Gulch. And over time, they limited what kept women out of saloons. And then in 1910, of course, they chased all the prostitutes, at least overtly, out of Brewery Gulch. And it seems that a lot of the working gals and their pimps and everybody else that was associated with them went down to Lowell. Lowell's unincorporated, doesn't have its own police. It had two deputy sheriffs, but county law enforcement is not as stringent usually as city or town or village law enforcement. So you had prostitutes operating on Main Street, Erie Street in Lowell, right along in the commercial district. That must have been a very interesting experience for families. And you can see some of the comments that appeared in the newspapers. A lot of folks were very upset about the idea of prostitutes being able to operate without any kind of a limitation. But prostitution was legal in the state of Arizona, and there were no ordinances to restrict it. And this is something that really interested me when I started looking at business directories and advertisements in the Bisbee Daily Review that were oriented in Lowell. Lowell was the center for psychics and clairvoyants and palm readers and everybody else that was associated with the occult and the supernatural. So Magic Kitty Bang Bang's predecessors operated out of Lowell. The Blonde Gypsy. I hope that was peroxide. And there was some pretty interesting, this is probably the most overt example of flagrant prostitution being displayed on Main Street. 1905, prostitute just takes her clothes off. She's in highly inebriated condition, decides that she's going to wander down the street. So she did. She walked down the length of Main Street in Lowell, Erie Street, buck naked, was arrested by the deputies and taken in, and that was in June 1905, taken into justice court because they didn't have city courts, they had the justice court, and fined $25. And this is one of the incidences that really irritated people who were trying to raise families. Like, this is not the kind of thing you want to expose your kids to. It wasn't really a community that was any more violent or ridden with crime than Old Bisbee or um, any of the other neighborhoods in the area. There was one incident that took place in 1913, and I think it was probably the most tragic incident, and that was when a deputy sheriff named John Rooney, Irish immigrant, of course, Irish cops, who, along with another deputy sheriff, and again, there were two deputies assigned to the Lowell district, tried to apprehend the McKenna brothers. I don't think there were any relation to Laurie McKenna from Central School. Frank McKenna and his brother were rowdies that liked to fight at the drop of a hat and were raising all kinds of hell. And Deputy Sheriff Rooney and his partner arrested them, smacked them over the head with their pistols, and then were marching them down to the jail when Frank McKenna grabbed John Rooney's gun and shot Rooney in the abdomen with his own pistol. Rooney grabbed the gun away from McKenna and shot him dead. But Rooney died a short time later, and it was an incident that caused a massive outpouring of grief in Lowell. They closed the town a couple of days later. The entire town just shut down in order to attend John Rooney's funeral over in Evergreen Cemetery. But killings were infrequent. It wasn't any more or less a law-abiding community than the rest of the Warren Mining District, except for, of course, Bisbee's first streaker in 1905. So why didn't Lowell want to annex to Bisbee? There were a lot of merchants in Lowell that didn't want the added taxation. The saloon keepers were happy until Prohibition to have wide open establishments. So Bisbee put out the overture on a number of occasions, and Lowell wasn't buying it. Never did come close to annexation, but Bisbee until 1959 when population had dropped. And Lowell also didn't want to incorporate. There was no great enthusiasm for the idea of incorporating as a separate community. They were happy to have the county provide their basic services, and they had everything that they needed. I've talked to folks from Lowell that said we didn't need to go to Old Bisbee to shop or Warren. We had everything we needed right there in Lowell. We had theaters, we had stores, we had all the institutions that we needed in order to be able to live our lives. So remained an unincorporated community until 1959. This is a good view of what Lowell looked like, and this is right there where when this is the road from Bakerville. This is Bisbee Road today, going down into Lowell. There's Ryan's Service Station, which is now a vacant lot. Over here is where the Dunlap Service Center is today. There's the Lowell School peeking out, and there's the Johnson Addition in downtown Lowell, and what's left of Sacramento Hill. It had already lost a good part of its elevation. So this is 1940. And there's a car from again, coming out from Bakerville and heading into Lowell. This is pretty much the same scene you'd see today, except that this would be a vacant lot. There's the power plant. And this is looking at where the traffic circle is today, right here. And looking towards the southeast, there's the Campbell Shaft. There's the road to Bakerville. There's the gas station on the corner, the standard station, with road signs pointing the way to Douglas, Naco, and Warren, and everywhere else. This is pretty much the same overpass that exists today, pretty much. There's the Justice Courts building, and this was the center of government in Lowell. Justice Courts, a small substation for the sheriff's department, and a lockup to keep people until you can take them over to the county jail over in Old Bisbee. And there's another good example of what Lowell looked like. Lowell had traffic problems and parking problems from almost the get-go. So we start seeing in 1910 and thereafter, and when you get up to about 1920, it's a crisis trying to find a place to park. And there's also a problem with speeders and scofflaws and everybody else just ignoring traffic. So the county said, we're going to establish 10 mile an hour, 15 mile an hour speed limits in Lowell. And merchants were not happy with that. But that's had to be because traffic was so congested. And by the late 1920s, of course, this was a state highway and a U.S. highway, U.S. Highway 80, and it was quite a busy thoroughfare. So this is the corner. This is where the Bisbee Breakfast Club is today. This is where the vacant lot is today that used to be the Phelps Dodge Mercantile Arizona Baking Company. And what folks might be surprised to find out was that there was a traffic control device, a stoplight, at the corner of the intersection of, I should say, this is Mason Street right here. And this is just kind of like a one block street to nowhere today, goes up to the Freeport property. But at that time, this right here was the intersection of the road that went to Upper Lowell and Jiggerville as it came out to US 80 Main Street in Lowell. And there's again Black Knob, Gold Hill, the background before dump number 7 existed. But look at all the businesses that existed at that time. It was a thriving commercial district. This was Safeway over here in 1940. And there's Naco Road, US Highway 80 going towards Old Bisbee, right there again. This is where City Hall is today. And this is the Lowell Women's Club. In the background, you can see Johnson Addition and Bower Hill. And there's that open air market that operated every weekend and sometimes for special events where people could bring produce and same kind of things that they bring to the farmers market today. Probably wouldn't have found a lot of aging hippies, but everything else that you would find at the farmers market today. And there's the Shell station. And this is a good shot of what they called the plaza then, the parking lot today for Lowell. And this is looking in the other direction. You can see that 3-story Mason Hotel. The bottom floor was just like it usually is in commercial buildings, shops, banks, things like that. And these 2 floors were the hotel. And here's where the Bisbee Breakfast Club and Food Co-op are today, or were. Food Co-op no longer exists, of course. And this is looking down towards Lowell from the Johnson Addition, and you can see Black Knob. And this is looking in the opposite direction. That's the Johnson Addition right there in the road, Naco Road, that's going to go up toward Slag Dump Hill, Dubacher Canyon, and then to Old Bisbee. And this is what Johnson Addition looked like in the 1950s. And there's the Johnson building. This is Bledsoe Mousy Motors, which later moved to the traffic circle and today is the big consignment antique store. And this is driving up towards Old Bisbee. And all along the way, from Lowell to Old Bisbee, you would have seen commercial buildings. You would have seen like a boarding house, apartment house, and you would have seen houses along the road and in the canyons. And this is Dubaker Canyon or Dubacher Canyon if you're German or Swiss, right before PD took it out. So this is all gone now. Just getting really close to Bisbee. This is Bisbee Motors right there. This is the original Lowell School. This existed from 1903, and this was on Cowan Ridge, just to the west of where Lowell is, or where Main Street is, Erie Street. And this is the building, of course, that replaced it in 1931. Lowell schools were very crowded from the very beginning. They had to continually upgrade this building until they couldn't upgrade it anymore, and they built a brand new. So this is what Lowell looked like. And let me introduce you to some of the people that came from Lowell. This is Earl Hinman. Earl grew up in Jiggerville. After the pit started being excavated in 1951, he and his family moved to Saginaw, where the houses were from the pit were relocated. And Earl went into acting. He moved to Tucson and went to Amphitheater High School and then to Hollywood. Became an actor. He was in soap operas. He was in feature films. In his opus, his finest performance was playing Wilson on Home Improvement. There's Tim Allen, who is the principal character, but Wilson was the guy that stood behind the fence, Tim Allen's neighbor, and you never saw the bottom of his face until the final episode. So he went from Jiggerville to Saginaw to Hollywood to a TV fence. Clarence Mattern was born in Lowell. Clarence was the son of English immigrants from Cumberland. And he went, let's see, where's Clarence? Right there. So Clarence became a minor league baseball player with the Bisbee Bees. This was taken in 1940, and then went up to the Los Angeles Angels. Was at his military service interrupted by his baseball career interrupted by military service in World War II, and then came back, played for the Cubs, the Cleveland Indians, and spent a lot of years in Pacific Coast League baseball before coming back here, opening an insurance office at the corner of Arizona Street in Condon. And that's his Chicago Cubs baseball card. Annie Mihelic, Croatian ancestry, and here she is right here with the Copper Queen traveling team, fast pitch softball team. Became a softball star even before World War II, and joined the Navy. She was born in Lowell, and what she used to tell people, and they'd say, "Where were you born?" She'd say, "In space." And of course, they'd look at her with a puzzled look, and she'd say, "The place I lived, which was Upper Lowell, is now just in the middle of a hole." This is Annie playing for the Rockford Peaches, All American Girls Professional Baseball League in 1947. And she came back here, married Bob Henry, and played for the Copper Queens for many years, and also worked for Hargis Insurance, I believe the school district. Died not too long ago. My favorite Lowell resident was Clarence Dupnick. And Clarence moved with his family to Jiggerville at a very early age, lived in Jiggerville until the pit was developed in 51, moved to Saginaw, went to University of Arizona for a couple of years, and then became a Tucson police officer, and there he is working for TPD. And in 1978, Clarence became Major Dupnick with the Sheriff's Department from TPD, and then became Chief Deputy Dupnick. And then in 1980, there he is being sworn in as Pima County Sheriff, and he stayed Pima County Sheriff until 2016, retired after 36 years of service. He was my boss for 6 of those years. 1951 or 1950, December 1950, Phelps Dodge announced that they were going to develop the Lavender Pit, which would be an extension of the Sacramento Pit, developing a large body of low grade ore. And they announced to the community that we're going to have to move much of Lowell is no longer going to exist. So they made an offer to either buy people's property or their homes at fair market value and demolish them, or if the homeowner could find a lot in the area to put it on, PD would move it for him and put it on a truck and take it out. And this is an example of somebody putting a house on a trailer, being pulled by a truck and taken probably to Saginaw. So these relocated homes ended up in Saginaw, Galena, Briggs, and Bakerville, and other sundry locations. This is the three-story Mason Hotel being torn down. These are homes being demolished in the Johnson Addition and slid down the hill on telephone poles and then put onto flatbed trucks and moved. And there's the Johnson building in the Johnson Addition. And this is what was done all over Upper Lowell, Johnson Addition, Jiggerville. Once the buildings that could be moved were moved, what was left was demolished and excavation of the pit started. So today, the pit got bigger and bigger. There's downtown Lowell. There's where Johnson Addition used to be, right here. And a lot of the topography was just radically altered. Lowell continued to be a thriving commercial district for a number of years after the pit was expanded and most of the residential areas were destroyed. So this is from a Chamber of Commerce brochure that Bisbee put out in mid-1960s showing it's still a happening place. And it continued to thrive even after the mine shut down. A lot of the commercial buildings were closed, but they were converted into other things. Here's Ernie Rogers, one of Greater Metropolitan Bisbee Naco's favorite characters, riding his horse into the Wonder Bar. And this is Doug Whitney and Booker, who were characters in a Bisbee occasional theater production of Bisbee Blanca, a parody of Casablanca that was done in the early 1990s at the occasional theater that was owned by Gumper on Erie Street in Lowell. So we start seeing a repurposing of storefronts and businesses in Lowell to bars and other commercial purposes. William Shatner made a movie here in the early 1990s on Erie Street, probably one of the most forgettable and worst science fiction movies ever made. And in 1994, the Arizona Baking Company building, the formerly Phelps Dodge Mercantile, started showing some serious signs of dilapidation. PD offered it to the Bisbee Foundation, which unfortunately didn't have the money to restore it and ended up demolishing it. So PD ended up just taking it down. That's where the vacant lot across from the BBC is today. And then the Lowell Americana Project came to town. This is Jay Allen, Dan Simonis, and Michael Page, and then David Rose. There's a lot of other people that were involved with that did the decoration with historic posters and signage and gas pumps and vintage cars that has turned Lowell into a major tourist attraction again. And bless these guys for all of the hard work they have done. They are creative geniuses, and you can see the Shell station as they restored it. Nothing's permanent. So this is a photo that appeared in the Tucson Citizen in 1951 showing what used to be the Johnson Addition. Here it is today. And of course, these thickener tanks are being demolished. This one's gone. When I took the picture, this one had already been taken out, and this one would go too. So Erie Street is lively again because of the Bisbee Breakfast Club, because of all the special events such as this car show that happened earlier this year, and people thronging the streets. but for how long? We know that the BBC's lease is anybody's guess as far as what's going to happen to this, and we just don't know what the future is. But it's my hope, and I hope it's your hope too, that this wonderful street continues to exist. And that's the end of my show. If anybody has any questions, I'll be do my best to answer.
Thank you so much, Mike. And we do have many questions for you.
Oh,
First question is from Gary. He asks you to comment on the relationship of Sacramento Hill and Sacramento Pit to Lowell and how the creation of the first open pit impacted the community.
Sacramento Pit didn't impact it a whole lot because it was located closer to Old Bisbee. Um, there were people that lived up on CNA Hill, and I think that that was right on the edge of the Sacramento Pit. It didn't take out much of Lowell at that time. What it did, though, I think would provide employment opportunities for some of the folks in the Lowell district. And it also gave PD, of course, inspiration for developing the Lavender Pit later on when they realized it was commercially feasible to process low grade ore, Ajo, New Cornelia mine, and of course the Lavender Pit later on. So I don't think it had a real powerful impact on Lowell in terms of other than perhaps as an economic stimulus. It didn't take out a lot of the neighborhood at that time.
And John asks, he notes that his great aunt worked at the Bank of Lowell, and to his understanding, a consortium of area banks. There was a consortium, rather, of area banks. Will you discuss the importance of the Bank of Lowell?
Well, all the banks that exist in Lowell provided loans and opportunity for people to put their savings. Miners and Merchants Bank was there as well. I think the Bank of Bisbee also had a bank in Lowell. If I remember correctly, the Bank of Lowell was originally located inside the Mason building, which is no longer in existence. So the interesting thing about Lowell is that it had a completely very sophisticated, thriving economy and economic system and social system. So it was a community in and of itself. It had financial services, commercial resources for people to buy goods and services and everything that they would need. And as folks have told me, we didn't need to go to Old Bisbee. We had everything we needed in Lowell, including entertainment. Lowell Theater was one of the best in town.
And I'm going to combine a question of Mark's with a question of John's. When was the peak population of Lowell, and what was it? And then did the fire in Lowell begin the community's downfall? You may have touched on a bit of this in your talk.
I did, but I'd be happy to go back to that because this is what happens in mining camps. It's a roller coaster ride, always dependent on the price of copper, economic conditions outside the community. Lowell reached its peak about 1917, and the estimate was somewhere between 6 and 7,000 people. So think of this: Lowell at its peak was larger than the city of Bisbee today, the whole thing. By the 1950s, it was down to about 1,500, I believe, in Lowell, the whole area. So a lot of those buildings that we would have seen in photographs at the time that the pit was starting to be prepared were already empty, probably sitting in dilapidated condition. Lowell was already getting rougher, really rough around the edges by 1950. So peak population about the same time that the whole Warren mining district was at its peak, around the first year of World War One, or our involvement in World War One, 1917.
Next, Gary asks, are there existing examples of miners' homes which would have existed in those communities? Are they still visible today?
Oh yeah,
And if yes, where are they?
they're in Saginaw. Saginaw is Lowell. Um, Most of those miners' shacks and residences that were moved from Johnson Addition, Upper Lowell, Jiggerville, ended up in Saginaw. Some of them are also located in Bakerville, in Briggs, Galena. So there's lots and lots. Lowell didn't die; it just moved, and that's what makes it so interesting. Is that mining towns reinvent themselves. Bisbee's reinvented itself. Lowell reinvented itself. And all you have to do is drive over to Saginaw and cruise the neighborhood, and you can see the same buildings that existed in Lowell pre 1951.
And Mike, are you aware if there is a directory to indicate where the houses from Lowell were moved to? That is a question from Penny.
Not to my knowledge, and it sure would be nice to have one. I think what you would need to do would be to trace the provenance of all those buildings. But again, if you go to Lowell and if there's anything that's not a manufactured housing from the 1960s and 70s, or a mobile home or modern construction, that came from the original part of Lowell. And it'd just be a matter of knocking on the door and asking people. Hopefully, they'd answer you in a pleasant way. When was your house built? I don't think there's ever been a Lowell or a Saginaw historic district survey done. There should be, because Saginaw is just Lowell reinvented. And of course, a lot of those buildings also were infill for Bakerville, and some of them in Galena, some of them in Briggs. Um, I'm thinking that'd be a very interesting project for somebody, maybe a student intern or someone else who needed something to do. Maybe somebody working for the Mining and Historical Museum as a volunteer.
That would be a great project. And for
Good.
those who may be interested, the first place I think I would suggest people to look would be at our Cochise County Archives, the Treasurer's Archives, because they would have had to pay taxes no matter where they lived. And their archivist at the archives, Kevin Pyle, he's just fantastic. He's a rock star. So I always
I'm also
suggest,
wondering.
uh-huh.
Oh, I'm just wondering what the property deeds would say as well. It might have the point of original construction on them. I don't know.
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah.
Well, you and I might have to go bug Kevin. Our next question is from Lisa. Are the existing structures in Lowell falling into the pit, as the news is stating, as the reason for the closure of the Bisbee Breakfast Club?
I don't know. Um, you know, I'd like to believe that everybody is being upfront what they say about conditions in Lowell, but I don't know. It would be interesting to hear from the state highway department because we hear about subsidence on 80. It'd be interesting to know what Freeport's actual intentions are for Lowell. Um, Mining companies are all about the Benjamins. They're about extracting copper and making money. That's their purpose for existence. Bisbee wouldn't be here if we didn't have mining companies doing that very same thing. But they have different priorities than we do. We want to keep our community pretty much the way it is. They're looking at developing copper. And I don't know who is being more forthright in terms of their intentions. I do know that the Bisbee Breakfast Club would very much like to stay in the same place. And I think a lot of us would very much like to see them and other businesses in Lowell stay in the same place too. We don't want to see that community die. Is it subsiding? It'd be nice to have an independent assessment done by a geologist, I think.
And do you know, Mike, does Freeport own what is left in Lowell, the
Not
building?
all of it. Not all of it. They own some of it. They own property all over the place in the Warren Mining District, but they own some of the buildings. Jay Allen owns, bless his heart, owns quite a bit of property. Dan's Luke Oldfield owns buildings in Lowell. So it's owned by Freeport, and it's also owned by parts of it are owned by other people that have purchased their properties. Um, I don't know what that means in terms of Freeport and what they can do if they say we found copper ore underneath your property, whether the mining law of 1872 would allow them to force eviction or not. I do know that today there would be a whole lot more outcry in protest if they tried to demolish Lowell. 1951, everybody just basically shrugged their shoulders and went along with it. And that same thing happened in Butte, Montana for years as the Berkeley pit expanded there. Same thing happened in Ray and Sonora, and same thing that happened in Morenci. People went along with it. Bisbee's a different place now. It's got a lot of independent spirits. Aging hippies do not like to be pushed around. So I think we'll find that if there are any actions taken by Freeport to demolish Lowell, that it would meet a whole lot of resistance as compared to before. And I'd like to say something that I've been thinking about too, and maybe other people could offer their opinions on this. The sacrifice of Upper Lowell, Tiggerville, Johnson Addition, all those residential neighborhoods may have served a greater good, not just providing employment for people, but also by keeping the economy of Bisbee robust for another 25 years. When the mines actually shut down in 1974 and in the pit, and then Campbell Shaft in 75, set the stage for the counterculture people, the artists, and all the folks that are Bisbee's aging hippies today to move in. So the sequence of events that took place may have been, with the destruction of Lowell, the best thing that could have happened to Bisbee in terms of the community, because it allowed the progression of events to take place where we start to see people moving in to take care of old Bisbee, to restore the buildings there, that happened in the 1970s. That could not have happened if the pit had not been expanded. We might just be like Jerome today.
And you had mentioned the ladies with a entrepreneurial spirit that worked in Lowell. And uh, one question was, when did prostitution become outlawed in Arizona? If you
That's a good question. I've been researching that. Um, U of A Law Library couldn't tell me the year that prostitution became illegal. Um, we know that prostitution, as far as an above ground activity, stopped in 1917 with something that was called the Red Light Abatement Act, that was passed to keep soldiers out of brothels, because venereal disease was a huge problem for the military during the First World War. So 1917, if you had a house of prostitution within, I believe it was 5 miles of a military installation, it had to be shut down. So Bisbee had military installations close by. So did almost every other town in Arizona. So prostitution, as far as a legal activity, ended for all intents and purposes in 1917, and then prostitution was made illegal sometime in the 1920s. I just haven't been able to pinpoint it.
Mike, thank you so much for this very informative and timely program that you've provided for our audience today.
And I want to thank everybody that took time from their busy Saturday to listen to this, because I agree with you, Annie. I think it's very important that we all pay close attention to what's happening in Lowell. And it would probably be wise for all of us to take a stand, one way or the other, how we feel about um, any kind of future development. Mining is important. Copper mining is a crucial industry. I guess we all have to think about how much are we willing to give up of our communities and our natural resources, irreplaceable resources in our communities, for mining to resume. And with that, I guess I would leave you.
All right, something for us all to ponder. And I'd like to thank our audience for joining us today. We will be back in 2025 with more online programming, so please check our Facebook page in the coming weeks for our next online program information. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.